everyone, Maria the Hedgehog here, and today I will be reading you all Chapter 15 of The Walking Dead Hope, written by Goofy Gomez, which was made as The Walking Dead fanfiction. This is apparently a love story between Clementine and Louis, who were both characters of The Walking Dead video game franchise. Now, Shadow introduced me to this series. Well, not the video game, but the whole series. I just find it pretty okay. I mean, some of the walkers are pretty scary in my opinion. But anyway, Goofy Gomez, thank you very, very much for giving us permission to read your stories. Now, are you ready to get reading, everyone? Okay, let's go. It's been 5 days, Clementine thought to herself as she watched the sunlight fade away into yet another cold night. Despite it being the middle of spring, these people sure knew how to make a cell drop 30 degrees come night. She shivered when another breeze blew past her, wrapping her arms around herself. As per usual, she could hear the moans and groans of the walkers on the other side of the wall. She presumed that the cell she was being held must have been very close to the outer perimeter. Tonight, however, the sound of the undead were unnervingly intense. She stood up, groaning as another pain shot through her stomach. Her lack of food was starting to take a toll. She clutched her stomach, looking around for the 10th time that day. So far, she found no way out of the predicament on her own. The walls were sealed on all sides with thick concrete. The windows had metal bars dug deep into the window frames, as the door was too heavy for her to even push. As she pondered on other ways out, the telling creak sound of the door opening made her jump. 2 armed guards entered the cell, brandishing large assault rifles in their hands and the handgun on their belts. Between them came John Myers, his hands held together behind his back. He eyed Clementine up and down, his eyes darting over to a pool of vomit beside one of the chairs. "I see you're making yourself comfortable," he teased, raising an eyebrow. "Well, room service here sucks," she replied with a shrug, "but other than that, I'm peachy." Myers chuckled, smiling down at the woman. Her hunched stance only accented just how tall the man really was. He cleared his throat, straightening up his back. "Dr. Madison tells me you refused to take that test." Clem crossed her arms and glared at the man. Despite what her brain was telling her, there was no way she was taking out 3 fully armed men in her state. So she settled for stares with witty remarks. "Why does it matter if I'm pregnant or not? You'll give me special treatment?" she mocked. The edge of Myers' mouth curled up again. He crossed his arms to match her stance, his legs bound together as if by an invisible rope. You've got spirit, kid, I'll give you that," he said, nodding at her. "We could use someone like you in the right arm. A fierce, strong survivor. A mighty great fighter, I hear. You gave my scouts quite a run for their money before they had to knock you out." "Well, 3 against 1 isn't really fair," Clem pointed out, flinching when her stomach rumbled. Myers looked down, smirking. "You're getting hungry?" he asked. She didn't dignify that with the response, instead choosing to glare at him. Rolling his eyes, Myers snapped his fingers, and the 2 guards stepped forward. Clem backed off, preparing for a fight with raised fists. "We're not going to hurt you," the old man assured her. "See, there's just a herd coming our way. Nothing we haven't handled, of course, but sometimes those pesky walkers manage to sneak 1 or 2 of the kind inside. Being so close to the wall, I don't think you would appreciate being torn apart should that happen to occur here, right?" The 2 men seized her arms from behind, getting a little resistance from the woman. There was no point in fighting that, she knew. They dragged her out of the cell, giving her the first look of the outside since she'd been locked in there. The hallway beyond was well lit with a mixture of overhead lights and small candles every few feet, with several similar cells on either side. Clementine figured a few of them were occupied from the banging of the metal doors. "Oh, excuse me." They walked at a brisk pace. "Been making her tip on her feet more than once. Once they were outside, the light of the street lamps almost blinded her. They were on a dirt path leading to a large white brick building a few blocks away. As opposed to Richmond's lively atmosphere, the compound she found herself in looked dull and devoid of life. A score of soldiers patrolled the streets, rifles at the ready. A few houses had been erected on either side of the path. Most of their lights were off, and Clementine could see a few silhouettes through the windows. As they walked, she looked up at the sky. Clouds were starting to cover most of it, their black hue blocking out the moonlight. Myers, who was a couple of paces ahead of them, reached for the door to the white building and knocked twice on it. The doctor, who Clementine assumed was Dr. Madison, opened the door for them with a small smile on his face as he spotted Clementine. "Here for a checkup?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "We're leaving her with you till the herd passes," Myers corrected, pushing Clem forward. As a final precaution, he took a pair of cuffs from his belt and bound her hands together. "Wouldn't want to lose her, would we?" We sure as heck wouldn't," Dr. Madison said, draping an arm over Clementine's shoulder and pulling her inside. Clem flinched, but kept her cool as she was dragged through the hall of what she assumed was the infirmary. On her left, rows of beds lined the walls. Most of them were unoccupied, though a couple hosted men and women alike with amputated arms or legs. A few of them had passed out, but one of them was still weeping the loss of his right forearm, clutching the stump that had replaced it. "Real secure place you got here," Clementine thought to herself, rolling her eyes. She was ushered to the side door to her right. The doctor closed the door behind them. He gestured to a bed for her to sit on, her eyes glued to him. He followed his instructions reluctantly. She held her hands together on her lap and looked around the room. It had a few medical machines strewn around, most of them seemingly out of order. Dr. Madison took a seat at a stool near a complicated-looking machine and grabbed his clipboard from the table beside him. He clicked his pen and wrote something on the top of the page, looking up at her sparingly. "So, Clementine," he said. "What do you want?" she huffed, annoyed that she still had to deal with this man. "I take it from your reluctance to take the test that you already knew." She brought her hands to her abdomen, looking away. He wrote something else and nodded to him. "You see, I was being honest when I said we cared," he assured her, placing a hand to his heart. "We've had our fair share of pregnant ladies come by, and more often than not, they tend to want to stay with us." Then why would I do such a thing?" she snapped. "For one, we have strong walls to defend us from the outside, guard patrol every night by trained soldiers, so you'll never be threatened. Medical equipment." He checked the points off his fingers, gesturing to the machines when he got to his third statement. "Talk about security with those amputees outside." She jerked her thumb toward the door on the other side of the room. Madison chuckled, shaking his head. "Those are people we have found in our perimeter recently, most of whom had been bitten. Fortunately for them, they were mostly located in expendable extremities." "Right," she said, snorting. "And the ones that weren't? Some couldn't be saved, unfortunately," he said somberly, pursing his lips. "But we tend to focus on the positive side. We've given them the choice to stay with us, as long as they pull their weight. I now present you the same position to you. You have until after this herd passes, and then—" His speech was cut off by a blaring of an alarm somewhere outside. Madison shot up in his seat, his eyes widening. He stared at her for a moment before clearing his throat and taking a keychain from inside his coat. "I gotta go check what the ruckus is about," he said, trying to keep his voice from trembling and doing a horrible job of it. Clementine smirked. "Then you better go," she said slowly, raising an eyebrow. "Wouldn't want to keep you long." He eyed her with slanted eyes and opened the door behind him. He reminded her not to move, closing the door back up. She heard the distinctive sound of the lock clicking and rolled her eyes. Where would I go, dummy? Obviously, she wasn't going to let his words stop her. She stood up decisively, looking around. She searched the wooden cabinets on the side of the room. On one side of the room, hovering where she could only find gauze and tape. Outside the door, she heard footsteps rushing from one side to the other. People on the outside were screaming. What's going on? She asked herself as she rummaged through yet another shelf only to come up empty. And this is where I will stop for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 of Maria the Hedgehog Reads Chapter 15 of The Walking Dead Hope.